I know it must be lonely and everything. Any questions about the exam that you guys had before? I'll cover it next time. As I told the latecomers, it was just a positively horrendous weekend for me, and I thought Monday was going to be a good day. But Monday ended up like being woken up at 4:45 in the morning after having gone to sleep at 12:30 at night, and then having to stumble through radio talk show host inane interviews from Phoenix, Arizona to someplace in, I don't know, Jesse James Country, Missouri. It was pretty harrowing trying to stay awake and say something, you know, which had a hook on it. So, and then all the other things that happened on that particular day, like dead herons and things like that. And you may know I told you I was fighting the battle to try to stop them from ruining the herons' habitat down in the Los Angeles Bay Marina. So anyway, I ended up having to pick up the dead carcass of the bird for the Natural History Museum up in Los Angeles. And that really cut into the ability to deal with all the rest of it. So if you have any particular questions you want to answer now, besides your grade questions, does anything puzzle you about the exam? And the IDs were a little bit, you know, harder than you might expect in historical Jesus class, perhaps. But I tried to pick something that you could identify to show you've been reading or paying attention to something. And the only hard one I would have thought would have been Beuthus or Mariam. Beuthus or Mariam. Did anyone have trouble with Beuthus? Well, you remember we discussed how in that Herod married the high priest's daughter of a second high priest, one he brought in from Egypt called Boethus, and then that was the second high priest's daughter he married. The first one was Mariam, the last Maccabean princess, after whom all the Marys seem to be named in the period that we have here in the Gospels, which by, I think, implication show the Gospel dramatis personae to be not anti-Maccabean. So that's an important point. I mean, look, if you didn't like what someone represented, you're not going to name your kid George Bush or something like that. Or there used to be a lot of Afro-Americans back in the 50s and 60s named like Roosevelt Greer, Woodrow Wilson, so-and-so, presidents whom they liked. And I never heard one who was named Coolidge or Hoover or Harding. I never heard any Afro-American who would name their kid Coolidge, Hoover, or Harding. I still haven't seen one named Eisenhower for a first name. But, you know, you will get these Democratic presidents of the early part of the last century. For a while they were in vogue. Now Islamic or more creative new names, non-slave names as they're called, are in vogue. But people are naming their child Mary. They're naming their child after in this period, they're naming their child after the last Maccabean princess, Mariam, Mary in English, Miriam in Hebrew, Maryam in Arabic, Mary in Greco-English. They're naming their child after someone who they have great respect for and who they yearn to have returned. She was killed by Herod, as you recall, or if you don't recall, I mentioned it, because he was jealous of her and he loved her so much, supposedly, according to Josephus' 5 chapters he spends on this love affair, which shows how high it seemed to have taken hold in the conscience of the people at that time. And we mentioned that was the first Joseph and Mary story, if you want to call it that, since Herod accused her of illicit relations with his brother-in-law Joseph. So there's a Joseph and Mary story right there. Not that that has any necessary effect on our Joseph and Mary story here. But in any event, look at the names. That's one of the things that originally got me into studying early Christian history of the Gospels and Christian origins in Palestine. the Maccabean names, you know, all of these people, Simon. You say, well, they just called him Simon. No, they didn't just call him Simon. Who is Simon in the Maccabean hierarchy? Simon is the third Maccabean priest-king, claimant to the Maccabean tradition, the one, all of whose heirs became priest-kings after him. He was the only Maccabean who had children that survived. Simon Maccabee, if you want to call him. Maccabee is not his last name. Maccabee is a cognomen. What does it mean, Maccabee? Yeah, I think it's supposed to mean the hammer. I don't know. It's supposed to be after Judas. But there was Judas, Jonathan, John, Simon. Well, you've almost got the whole retinue of names right there. And then as they went down, Mariam, pardon, squeaks, Mattathias, Matthew, Mattathias, Matthew. So, I mean, all these names are represented in the New Testament just about, except perhaps for Jonathan. But John, Simon, Mariam, Judas, Matthias, doesn't say a lot, but these are all represented among the followers of Jesus. So that struck me, that this had to be a movement or a group of individuals, if these names are accurate, who held the Maccabean heritage with some affection. You don't name your name. I mean, in Islam, if you know Islam, people who went to Iraq, it turns out, didn't know anything about Islam, so we discovered. They don't even know the difference between, apparently in the State Department and the War Department, they don't even know the difference between a Shiite name and a Sunni name. They don't know that Sunnis don't usually name their children Ali, and Shiites don't name their children Omar. You say, what? Why? Well, you have to know the history of the split. Omar is the enemy of the Ali party, and Ali is the enemy of the Omar party, and so on, and one blames the other for the death of the other. And you would never find a Shiite who would name his children after a famous Umayyad Caliph, Muawiyah. Well, you don't name your children after an enemy name. You only name your children after a name which is sympathetic in most circumstances.